It's a sensible way to put it, isn't it, really? Because it's true. You just don't like to think about it, that's all. So let's get a sense of urgency. Thinking no time to waste in this precious life. Let's listen to some teachings here. See what Buddha has to say. See if we can take some tools from all this information to use in our life. To develop our qualities and be able to be of benefit to others one step at a time. You can sing that prayer on page 7. The first 2 lines are expressing our reliance upon the Buddha and his teachings, and the second 2 lines are kind of expressing what we just said before. You can sing it in Tibetan. Sangye charam soke choknam la jamchu parudam nikyam suchi dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drompa sho Sangye charam soke choknam la jamchu parudam nikyam suchi dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drompa sho Sangye charang soke chongnam la janchu barudang nikyam suchi Jagi chonyen gipe sonam ki Jola penche sangye drupasho. All right. So what we're going to talk about today? Practice meditation, isn't it? Is that what it is? Yes. Okay. All right. So let's get clear what that means, because I think there's an awful lot of ridiculous ideas about it. Well, I mean, maybe not ridiculous, but let's see what Buddha has to say. I suppose one of the commonest understandings of meditation in the West, the second we hear it, we think it's a method of being calm, to calming ourselves down, you know, which doesn't sound bad. We need calming down. But it's, in terms of the big picture, it's like one tiny miniature part of it. The word, it's interesting, the word in Tibetan, the verb to meditate, it's interesting. It's simply the verb to familiarize, which completely throws us if we have all our concepts of what we think meditation is about. To familiarize. Then you think, well, excuse me, familiarize what with what? Well, simple. Familiarize your mind with 2 things for the Buddha. That which is true, well, clearly that's to do with the Buddha, and we're looking into what he says is true, and that which is virtuous. Because right now, he says, and this is a really crucial point, because right now, given that we've got this mind, and the part of our mind which is called the delusions, the neuroses, the negative parts, the misconceptions, the afflictions, all these terms that are used to refer to the parts of our mind that we know so well, which are the opposite to calm, attachment, anger, fear, jealousy, all this stuff, the voices of ego, as I like to call them. That basically what Buddha is saying is, when we understand Buddhist psychology, that these states of mind have 2 functions. They cause us to be familiar with that which is false and that which is non-virtuous. That's their job. So their job is to cause us suffering. They're neurotic, they're delusional, we live in the extent to which we're caught up in anger, attachment, jealousy, the rest, is, for the Buddha, the extent to which we are not in touch with that which is true or real. The extent to which, meaning we're caught up in fantasy world, and at the same time, the extent to which we are caught up in, therefore, doing harm to ourselves and others. So that which is, so right now we're utterly familiar with that which is not true and that which is non-virtuous. So the purpose of meditation, which is simply a word that we can use to refer to a way you use your mind to transform it into the way Buddha says we can, which is to be in sync with that which is true and that which is virtuous. That's the point. That's the only point of this utilizing techniques that are labelled meditation. So more broadly, you can hear from that verb, to familiarize, any second in the day that you're familiarizing yourself with kindness, love, compassion, wisdom, and lessening your neuroses, you are technically meditating in this sense of familiarizing your mind. You can't say you're not. So therefore, meditation is a question of degree, isn't it? Because this is where we have to understand the Buddha's understanding of the view of the mind, which is, we've got the gross level, which is our day-to-day sensory and conceptual, which is out of control completely, which is the tip of the iceberg as far as the Buddhist view of the mind is concerned, in terms of its capacity for cognition, but which is the only level of mind we posit as existing in our materialist world, and therefore the only level of our mind that we really talk about. Then we've got subtle consciousness, or if you like more generally, a subtler level of cognition, which we virtually never go to, virtually never touch, because it's not posited in our world. And so in the bigger picture and in the long term, as far as the Buddhist approach is concerned, looking into the long-term goal of this cultivation of this perfection of our minds, this Buddhahood that Buddha posits, which would be your mind fully developed in that which is virtuous and in sync with that which is true. That's what being enlightened means. It's a psychological state, but way more at a much subtler, more advanced, more extensive level, like I'm saying, than we would ever posit as even possible in our materialist world of the view of the mind. But using meditation, in the long term, we need these skillful techniques, these classic techniques that we visualize a person sitting like this doing, you know. So the only reason you're sitting like this, with your senses subdued, is that in the long term, so that you can access these more subtle levels of cognition. Because when you've gotten to even a fairly gross level of these subtle levels of cognition, your senses have virtually ceased. So you don't keep your eyes open and stand on your legs and walk around. You'd fall over. So you've got to go, you've got to sit in that position in order to cultivate the habit to access these more subtle levels, which is the long term, which we need to do in the long term. But of course we can start every day. So basically in Buddhism there are two kinds of meditation, two ways of using the mind in meditation. Millions of techniques. And once you understand these two main modes, you can make up your own every day. Once you know what you're doing and why you're doing it. So the first kind, we can broadly speaking call it concentration meditation, or as we're knowing more and more these days, it's referred to as, a common word that's used these days more and more, mindfulness, which is taking on a kind of a life of its own, and which actually in many senses is being misunderstood, certainly if compared with the Buddhist understanding. In other words, mindfulness is one of the many, many of the states of mind that we need to cultivate in order, in the long term, to get this extraordinarily subtle levels of deep focus that the Buddha says we need to access eventually in order to really unravel the nonsense in our minds and achieve this potential that we've got. So mindfulness is, it's fine, it's great, it's wonderful what's happening these days, people wanting to do this kind of technique. But basically these techniques that we use to help us focus the mind, the long-term goal of which is to cultivate what they call single-pointed concentration. It's a state of mind, like I was indicating earlier, is not even posited as existing in our culture. It's like fairyland, And it's a subtler state of mind, once you've accomplished it, where the gross level of your conceptuality and your sensory literally have stopped functioning. If you were to see a person in this state of mind, they would look like they were dead. So this techniques came from the Hindus, pre-Buddha. They're not Buddhist in their nature. Buddha just utilized these and ran with them to do the job that he says we need to do. And in the long term, which we have to do at a subtler level. So in the long term, we need to have this concentration technique accomplished. So we can start this straight away. We can start practicing, watching your breath, doing this kind of focusing meditation. Vast majority of us in this life won't accomplish that goal. To really accomplish it, you need to, just give up sex, drugs and rock and roll and go to the mountains, basically. And if you're really qualified, you might get it in, a couple of years. Full on, intensive, all day, every day, working at it. But that's just the beginning. The purpose of doing this, accessing this subtler level of extremely focused cognition, is so we can do the real work in the second mode. Now normally these two types of meditation are known, they're labelled in terms of their result. The first one is called calm abiding. And that's the name for the result. When your mind is at this subtler level, absolutely still and absolutely focused. A state of mind that we don't have at all, even remotely, in our regular life. And then in order to do the real, we've got to have that in the long term in order to be successful at the second mode of meditation, which is where the real work happens. So the first one's just preparing. So it has itself marvellous results. In itself is astonishing, the results it can bring. But this is only the beginning. And this is where you could suggest that the Buddha diverges from the Hindus. They would say that once you've got that, you've achieved the goal. You've got samadhi, as they call it. But for the Buddha, all you've done is control the mind, discipline the mind, focus the mind, get to this subtler level. But now you've got to use that to do the real job of getting rid of the nonsense in the mind, so-called, and eventually seeing reality, realizing emptiness, which is then what achieves our own liberation. So in the second mode of meditation, this is too known in terms of its result, and it's called special insight. And it refers to the insight into emptiness. Or it's known often as accomplishing the wisdom. The way they talk in Tibetan, they kind of talk about the state of mind as the subject, the wisdom that realizes emptiness. So the real work happens in the second mode. The first one just preparing the mind. So in ordinary daily terms, then, let's forget about the long-term use of these techniques, but let's look at the advantages to us of attempting to develop these techniques in our daily life. There's no question, the first one, there's no question that to do anything in our life properly, forget even spiritual, just in our daily life, there is just no question that we need some focus. We need to discipline the mind, to focus the mind, to do any job, like make a cake, or to do the job of having a relationship where you don't completely lose the plot and vomit out everything you feel. It's clear we've got to have a focused, disciplined mind. And this is no question a marvellous technique to help us do this. But what's interesting is we can't even begin to accomplish that until we've done some prior work. There's another packaging of Buddha's teachings called the 3 higher trainings. The third one, the goal, is wisdom. To accomplish the wisdom in the mind, the state of mind of wisdom through which one realizes emptiness, which is meaning cut the root of all the nonsense. Begin the process of achieving our own liberation. That's the goal, wisdom. But in order to get this, you've got to have the second of these 3, which is called single point of concentration. But in order to get that, you've got to have the first one, which is called the practice of morality. And 99% of us will be practicing mostly that in this life, which is in day-to-day life, beginning to harness this crazy body, speech and mind of ours so we don't go around harming ourselves and others. Beginning, controlling our body, speech and mind. Because without controlling our body, speech and mind, it is impossible to get any focus at all. I mean, if you're tortured by jealousy and attachment and anger, you know yourself. You can't sit still. You can't control your body. You can't control your speech. Forget. What a joke. Forget about sitting down and trying to focus on your breath. What a joke. Why our minds are berserk right now, but we can't focus for more than a moment on our breath. Just even our breath. is because we're uncontrolled at the first level. We haven't begun. We have begun. In comparison with some people on this earth, we're highly advanced. But in terms of the level to which we can accomplish these levels of morality and control body, speech and mind, we're berserk, you know? So this is why it is crucial to do this, you know, to do the regular daily practice, according to the Buddhist teachings, of controlling your body and speech. First, forget your mind. Control your speech. I mean, just this alone is already incredible. If we look at the other packaging of the Buddhist teachings, the Lam Rim, as we know, the Tibetan packaging, the very first stages of practice, the so-called first scope of practice, as they call it, I like to call it junior school, mainly is concerned with controlling our body and speech, controlling our behaviour. Mainly that. Not much talk about the mind yet. That comes in high school when we go to the second scope, where we begin now to understand the mind, and we can do some focusing meditation and start to investigate the mind. Just get to see how it all works and get to the root of the problem, which is the neuroses in the mind. But we can't do that until we've harnessed our body and speech. So this is kind of boring to us. We don't think, we think, I want to be a Buddhist, I want to meditate. You know, we assume immediately a Buddhist does meditation, you know. So there we are, completely having mental breakdown, having crazy relationships, and we hear about meditation, and we go to try to do it. Forget it. I mean, we've got to start. There's no question we've got to start somewhere. But what I'm saying is, the extent to which we can't get far with it is the extent to which our body and speech are uncontrolled, is the extent to which we haven't really harnessed morality, the practice of ethics, the practice of morality. And at this very first level of morality, for the Buddha, the very first level of ethics is, you know, is the practice of refraining from harming others. And how do we harm others? It's easy, not complicated, with your body and your speech. So Buddha lists this little checklist of 10 don'ts. The first 7 are the body and speech. The last 3 are the mind. It's just the beginnings, this tentative, you know, my way of saying it, just this tentative beginnings of controlling our crazy mind. But the first 7 are the point. And it's so, you know, it's so simple, it's almost embarrassing. But we kind of gloss over it. Doesn't sound very Buddhist. You know, it's like what your grandmother tells you. Behave nicely, please. But do not underestimate it. If we could decide in our life to control, just to do these 7 that the Buddha suggests, the checklist, the 10 don'ts, a little checklist of how to be a better human being. Don't kill any living being. Just don't kill. If you meet a living being, leave it in peace. The ants, the roaches, the humans, the fish, the deer, leave them alone. For most of us that probably is not too difficult, except maybe for the ants and the roaches. And then of course that by extension, try not to harm anybody with your body. Don't punch them in the nose or stomp on them, you know. Try to do this, control this. Second one, they talk about, you know, controlling your sexual misconduct. Because we have masses of attachment, and sexual attachment, utilising the body. Don't jump on too many people, you know, behind the back of your partner. Don't rape too many people. Try and control, harness your energy. It's helpful. Very sensible. Third one, don't take things, don't take the ungiven, as Lama Zopa calls it. Just leave, you know, if it doesn't belong to you, hasn't been offered, leave it there. Just 3 of the body. So simple, not complicated. 4 of the speech. There's only so many ways you can harm people. There's not that many. And I think for most of us, you know, clever, educated people, it isn't the body that we use too much to harm each other. It's the speech, because we're so clever with this mouth of ours, you know. So look at the 4 of the speech. Harsh speech, lying speech, rabbiting on about nothing speech, called idle gossip. I like to call it rabbiting on about nothing. And maybe the worst one, speaking the faults of others behind their backs. We think it's a virtue. We go home and spend the whole day talking about the politicians. We think it's virtuous to do it. People, we can't wait to get home from work to talk about the people at work. We can't wait to get to one sister to talk about the other sister. We can't wait to talk about each other behind our backs. It's one of the worst faults we all have. So just these 4 to control. Forget the rats and roaches who'll have a party, as Lama Zopa says, because now you're leaving them in peace. Forget for their benefit. Forget the people that you won't harm with your harsh speech and your rabbiting on. But look at this is the point here, look at the benefit to oneself. Look at the benefit. I mean, you don't have to worry about controlling your mind. Just by controlling the servants of the mind, which is your body and speech, you naturally control your mind. Naturally. Because every time you vomit out, you're putting fire, oil on the fire, isn't it? So it is a powerful method for helping you control your speech, for helping you control your mind. They're much more easy. Okay, it's a struggle, because we struggle with all these crazy thoughts, and we are compelled to have it out the mouth, because we don't know how to handle it ourselves. Just learning to at least don't harm others with our body and speech. Generally, that's the practice of morality. The morality of restraint, already fantastic. Then we can begin to look into our minds, start to concentrate. Because once your mind has calmed down, once there's less energy coming out of the body and the speech all over the place, uncontrolled berserk, already your mind is more calm. Then it's less difficult to begin the process of focusing the mind. So there's no doubt a component of this in one's daily practice is indispensable. There's no question. Controlling, focusing on the breath. Take the breath as a start. No doubt. Marvellous. So then, and again, in an ordinary sense, how would we use, what's the second kind of meditation all about? We get a bit confused about this one, I think. The goal, as I've been saying, which is, the goal is to achieve this special insight based upon calm abiding. So calm abiding is the name, like I said, given to the end result of this single point of concentration, which is a state of mind that, as I said, probably vast majority of us won't accomplish in this life, but we can certainly attempt it. And the special insight, meaning insight, as I said, into emptiness, developing the wisdom in the mind, which is the name given to a certain type of intelligence in the mind that can see clearly the way things exist. So, okay, that's the end result. So how do you get there? What's the method you use to get there? Well, interestingly, in this particular approach here, the method for accomplishing this special insight is a technique that they call, Tibetans call it, analytical meditation. And we go, wow, I can't do analytical meditation, so complicated. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but do you know what analytical meditation means? It's a fancy medieval term for the verb to think. It means to think. Now, this is a big surprise because we don't think thinking is meditation, because we have these cliched ideas of what we think meditation is. But remember, it means to familiarize your mind. Well, again, sorry to disappoint you, but every time you go learn cooking and French and music and mathematics, guess what you're doing? You're familiarizing your mind with cooking, French and mathematics. And what's the method you're using? You're thinking. So it's actually something that in our culture we are super excellent at. And do not misunderstand me. I'm not even being cliched here. I'm being literally correct. It's just that we don't do it sitting like this. We do it at our desk or at our computer, Now, we all know if you want to learn anything, want to familiarize your mind with music or cooking or French, you need to have some concentration. It's obvious. So we actually are very familiar with these two techniques. It's just that we don't call it meditation and we haven't formalized it in the way that they describe here. So, when I learned mathematics at school, when I learned 1 and 1 was 2 from my teacher when I was a little girl, she basically said to me, here's the information, Robina. Take this information, go home, do some focusing meditation, then go to the second mode of meditation, do some analytical meditation, and then please get insight into the fact that 1 minus 2. That's essentially what she said what she meant when she said, go do your homework. She gave me some information, which is merely intellectual for me, And she wants me to go home and internalize it and make it my own experience, doesn't she? That's what learning something means. We just don't call it these terms, that's all. So obviously the level to which we are internalizing this information here is obviously more subtle, more literally profound than the level to which we internalize maths or French. But I'm really not joking now, but the process is identical. You listen to the information, you take it away, you clearly should have some focus, and then you think it through. And then what happens? The penny drops. I'm sitting at my desk as a little girl. Well, I should have been, I didn't. But if I were, I would have had my blocks, I had my numbers and worked it out. So I didn't know what 1 + 1 meant. But I'd have to have that information. This is a really important point too, that because we so mystify emptiness and mystify the teachings and think it's some cosmic special thing, But it's not. You go to your class, you listen to the teachings on emptiness, you get the nuts and bolts of it. Initially it's intellectual, or indeed karma, impermanence, or anything else in this Buddhist path. You take this information, you go home, you get some focus, and then you go to the second mode of meditation, using your notes if you like, or if you've got a good memory, like the monks in the monasteries would memorize it all. And then they'd go home, they'd get their focus, and then they would go through it in their mind. And then guess what would happen? Just like the 1 + 1 = 2. I put it together. I have to have my information clear. I've got to know that there's 1 and plus and another 1 and an equals and a 2. There's the bare bones information. There's no confusion about that. Then I've got to put it together. I've got to make it experiential. And I've got to verify it. So I think it through. And then at some point I'll go, oh, mummy, I get it. That's the insight, isn't it? Well, that's how you get enlightened, using this methodology. It's not complicated. It is complicated. The content is complicated, but we're very clever. We can do it. But it needs immense focus, immense discipline, immense clarity, precision, which we think is not necessary in spiritual. We have this vague notion that meditating on emptiness, kind of like emptiness, waiting for some vision to come. We're so superstitious about it. It's unbelievable, actually. But the methodology is not something we're unfamiliar with. And I'm really not joking. You've got to listen to the information first. You then need some focus. Then you go to the second mode and you think it through. You do your analytical meditation, which using your brain, squeezing your brain, as Lama Yeshe put it. This is how you become familiar with these teachings. If you choose to, This is actually classically what the two kinds of meditation are about. So before we go into this in more depth, do you have any questions about all that? So it's all clear, is it? Does it all make sense? Mm-hmm. Go, darling. Talk to me.
Where's the mic? Thank you.
Yeah.
So let's say I managed to get concentration.
Stop right there. What do you mean manage to get?
Let's say I discipline myself to sit down, maybe meditate.
And get a little bit of focus.
Do some
focusing.
Right, because I can't remember what you called this because I forgot my pen. But I think the first kind of concentration.
Calm abiding. It's called, that's when you've got it. But that's a long way to go.
Oh.
You don't wait till you've got it first, baby. That would be, when your mind is at a very much subtler level, your brain wouldn't any longer be working. You'd look like you were dead. There'd be no breathing. You'd be at a subtle level of mind. You'd be in a state of bliss. You'd be super clear. You'd be clairvoyant. A whole bunch of things will come from this. So we're not talking waiting to get there, baby.
Okay, totally didn't get that.
So you just get some concentration first. You start where you are and you get whatever even just doing 5 minutes a day, you can get some focus. You get into the habit, don't you, of staying on the topic in your head rather than following every crazy thought that comes. So like I said earlier, just beginning to attempt to focus your mind has itself great benefit because you stop following every crazy thought. At least you're attempting to.
I guess that's what I'm trying to do right now, to just follow my breath and
What's that?
I sit down and I breathe and then I watch my mind and it's crazy.
That's right, and join the club. That's okay.
Right, and then I say, trying to beat myself up and say I'm crazy, I just say that I'm thinking.
What, darling? Sorry, what?
Sorry.
What are you telling me?
Okay, what I really want to ask you
Yes, go
is
on.
this.
Yes.
After I get a little bit of concentration from just sitting down, meditating, and
Uh-huh.
breathing, watching my thoughts,
Uh-huh.
and I want to get insight about some of the things.
Okay, are you practicing, so you're practicing the Buddhist path. You're trying to practice the Buddhist path, are you? Is that what you're doing here?
Yes,
Okay, so you listen to the teachings?
yes,
And you try to internally, you try to think about them? You
yes.
think about impermanence, you think about karma, you think about compassion, yeah?
Yes.
Well, all this is here is doing that in thinking in a formal way based upon some concentration that you might get. You don't have to do it sitting on your cushion. You can do it while you're driving. You can do it sitting here. It's just, obviously, as you get more focus in this first type of meditation, naturally you can go more deeply in the second mode because your mind is really focused. Most of us won't get to that degree. Do you understand what I'm saying here?
I think you're saying I can meditate anywhere.
You can
and
think about the
this stuff,
teachings
because
all
it's
day
thinking.
and night. Yeah, of course you can.
So, how important is it to sit down on a cushion? Is it helpful for a beginner to do that?
Depends on the person. I didn't sit for 7 years. I thought, what a stupid idea to sit down with my eyes closed. I'm really serious. We've got so many cliched ideas that you're not a Buddhist if you don't sit and watch your stupid breath. I thought, what a dumb idea. I don't want to do that. Depends on the person, dear. This cliched idea.
Right.
We have about a Buddhist, I must meditate. What does it mean, Watch your breath. Watch your breath while you're driving. Watch your breath while you're walking. I don't care.
Thank you.
But I will say this, though. It does, because we are creatures of habit, or we're attempting to develop new habits, it is good to have a formal practice, something in the morning and something at night. Of course it is. And it is good to sow the seeds, to sit there focusing, sitting the right way and watching your breath for a few minutes. Of course it is, because you're sowing the seeds for it. Of course it's excellent to do that. All I know is my mind was so berserk, I thought, what a stupid idea. I don't want to meditate, I just want to get on with doing things, So I sort of I became a nun, and then I just continued working, editing books and doing that kind of thing. I did my practices, I would take initiations, and I did my mantras, but not sitting on my cushion with my eyes closed. I would have exploded. I did it sitting up and walking. It's okay, I've got so many superstitions. But the point is, sweetheart, listen, in the long term, when we're getting more advanced, you need to be at a more subtle level of mind. And obviously, if your mind is at a more subtle level, which is beyond the senses, clearly you've got to be sitting like this. You couldn't do it any other way. You'd be ridiculous. You see my point? You're beyond the senses. Long way to go, baby. And at that level, you can really do immense work, thinking through at a subtle level the teachings and really familiarizing the mind with emptiness, with karma, with bodhicitta and the rest. It's a much more advanced level of doing that. But we can do it at the level, whatever level we are at. In terms of these two modes of meditation, in terms of internalizing this stuff that we're listening to here. Are we communicating?
We are communicating.
Okay, now there's another whole way of seeing all this sitting business and practice, and I haven't gone to that, well maybe we'll go into a second, is where if we are in this tradition, we start taking on board visualizations and mantras. And all the lamas would say that those practices, they're very, very potent, very marvelous, very beneficial for our mind, where we're using meditations, where we're using the Buddha, because there's superpower in those particular techniques. Now, for those, still I did those, but I didn't sit doing them. I'd do them while I was walking or driving, do my mantra and think of Chen raising and blah, blah, blah. But there's great advantage in doing those meditations, going through the process. Were you here for the Tara meditation I led?
Yes.
Did you see how that was quite a helpful type of technique, right?
Yeah,
those are very, very, very nice for our mind to do. And it's just helpful to sit quietly do it. And you're using your creative imagination, basically. Do you understand?
Yes.
Because you're training your mind in a different way, thinking in a positive way, identifying with perfection and goodness and purifying and all that. So that's a very vivid way that we can use our meditation. But the classic one I'm talking here is in terms of these cultivating concentration in order, in the long term, to cut through the ego garbage to get to see reality. This is the classic way of presenting these two types of meditation. Do you understand my point?
I do.
Are we communicating?
Yes.
Good. So according to your own level, sweetheart, you're the boss, not Buddha. You can be a Buddhist without ever sitting on your bottom with your eyes closed.
Mm-hmm.
All right?
Well, I'm somewhat, unlike you, I think, I'm not a person of action, so it'd probably be good sometimes to do more meditate in motion.
What, darling?
I'm good at sitting and doing nothing, so I don't know.
Well, that's not good. That's just laziness. That's called spacing out. You see, some people, you mean you can sit comfortably, you can sit quietly.
Yes.
Yeah, sometimes that can be laziness, though. See, that's a big misconception about meditation.
I agree.
You see, relaxation, for example, is what people think meditation is about. Relaxation is great. We do need to do it because we're all a nervous wreck, you know. We do need to do it. But don't sit looking holy to do it, darling. Lie down on your bed and relax. Much better. This meditation, the first kind, is an immensely disciplined technique. It needs will and determination, not spacing out. That's not meditation.
No, I do understand that.
Good.
I was trying to be funny.
No, I know, but that's okay. That's all right. And maybe it's fun to sit and do nothing. We'll keep out of trouble that way anyway. That's okay. Okay. Anybody else something to say? Something to say? Nobody? Yes. Yes.
So what's refreshing to me about you not emphasizing on the sitting meditation is that I'm coming from the tradition where sitting meditation is very, very important.
Of course.
Sometimes you do retreat where you sit 12 hours a day.
Yes, exactly.
And in the beginning, when I first took on it, it was really good, I thought.
Yes.
And then after some years, it becomes a little bit sort of routine, and then you just sit for the
No, I
moment of
understand.
sitting, and
Yes,
then
exactly.
you don't see any progress, and you're just craving for that moment where, I used to be really clear when I'm sitting, and then I'm
That's
not
right.
anymore, I feel miserable.
Sure.
So it's refreshing to me that that's not the only way to practice.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
really is not the only way to practice. It really is not the only way to practice, you know. It's so important to know. We can get very cliched about this stuff, you know. Oh, you're a good Buddhist because you sit quietly for a while. I mean, so what, you know, I don't care. It's just the body. Yeah. What else? You, sweetie, yes, go. Yeah.
Just to mix it up a little bit in terms of getting concentration, and this is feeding off, I think, what Juan Talk was getting at. Can you sort of stretch or kind of get in the category of concentration through certain yoga poses?
Yeah, but that's not the point here.
Sure.
You can't, okay, listen. You can get concentration playing tennis.
Yeah.
I got concentration doing kung fu.
Yeah.
Involving your body in any action can help you focus your mind. It's great. So we've got to understand what we're trying to, in the long term, what we're trying to achieve. Of course, this is why I think for kids, you know, berserk energy. It's ridiculous to get some poor little kid down to sit and watch their stupid breath. Give them kung fu to do. Give them a job in the garden. Tell them to run up and down the street. Because I remember I used to go to my kung fu when I was living in London. I did kung fu years ago. When I was a nun, I remember. And I would go to my teacher's kids class. And he had these 60 kids and all these young working class kids. It was an incredible practice for them. He happened to be a good teacher. He was a Buddhist anyway. So that was their way of focusing and channeling all this crazy energy. And so he taught them discipline, he taught them respect, he taught them self-respect. It was you could see the benefit to that little person's mind, you know, and tasting their own potential, and controlling their body, controlling their mind, controlling their speech, having respect for each other. So you can do that in any activity in order to help our mind stay focused. People can focus by killing each other. Snipers need very good focus. So we've got to see why we do those things in order to get the focus. But then what? The point is then what, once you've got the focus. The focus can bring incredible experience. Talk to people who are doing running. They talk about being this blissful kind of physical experience. And because we're all junkies for physical experiences, we think that's the point. It's not the point. It's just the beginning. Now you use that focus, and this is the point here. If you're being a musician, you use the focus to get better at music. Here, we're using the focus to know our mind and to familiarize it with Lord Buddha's teachings, which is what we're trying to do here. So it's just a start in this context here. We can see immediate benefit of it, but then what do you do with it is the point.
Right, yeah, I
That's the
wasn't
point.
using that example just to be the sole,
No, I know,
method,
sure.
but
But
maybe
you can
there
do
was some
whatever you
slight
like.
benefit.
But the point here, of course, is because if you did a classic session of meditation, you'd sit on your cushion, you'd get in the right posture. You know, there's a certain method, and we can go through, we can discuss this. It's coming straight from the lineage, right back to Lord Buddha, 2,500 years. You know, you plug into that kind of line. You know, you do your sitting, you do your concentration, and then seamlessly you go to the second mode, and then you will take your topic, and then you will think about it, okay? And you'll analyze, and then at some point an insight to it. At some point a feeling for it will come, an intuitive as opposed to intellectual. So what you do, how you combine these two kinds of meditation in one session. You sit and do your focus, you go to your second mode. You just take your teachings you just heard in the teachings, you've got it in your mind, you think it through. And this thinking can be quite sophisticated level of thinking. We think thinking is kind of berserk and all over the place and random, but it's very disciplined thinking using logic, you know. And then at some point it will trigger, because you're being more quiet, it will trigger a little feeling, an insight. So you would hold that insight, you would stop the analysis, and you would revert to the concentration, but this time on that insight. And that's what you do more and more and more until eventually you've got this profound single-pointed concentration, oneness with the insight. They say like water and water mixed together. And that's eventually how you realize emptiness, non-conceptually.
So to me, I brought up yesterday about emptiness and the Lama Zopa Rinpoche saying how you can understand the concept of emptiness intellectually.
That's right. You use that
yes.
in your meditation until eventually it becomes real.
Okay.
Just like, you know, you can know a recipe really well. You can read a book. You can tell someone else that recipe. But then you've got to make the cake, and that's the experience of it. But you've got to have the right words first. This type of meditation, you've got to have, like with 1 and 1 is 2, I've got to have the right words. I can't be confused. If I think she said 1 and 1 is 3, believe me, I will never get an insight. It'll always be wrong. So this is which is not how we think about spiritual, in terms of realizing impermanence, realizing karma, realizing the various points of the teachings. This is the classic methodology. But you can do it on the run. You can do it thinking through in your daily life. You can do it behind the wheel. It's just that the advantage of sitting in this concentrated mode, you can go more deep because you're undisturbed and the senses are not involved. Do you see?
Yeah.
It's a great advantage.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So the other way you use these two kinds of techniques in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition is in terms of Tantra, which of course is where you're using the visualization of the Buddhas and the use of mantra. But it's exactly the same technology, the same methodology. You do your concentration, and then instead of thinking something through, you're visualizing the Buddha. You're familiar with the painting, with the picture. You visualize the Buddha. You literally, in your mind, you draw the picture of the Buddha. More and more exact, exactly holding this, holding that, doing this, the lotus this way, that way. And then how you combine these two modes of meditation in this type of practice, deity yoga they call it, you would then focus on that visualization. And you, instead of concentrating on your breath or concentrating on an insight, you'd concentrate on that. And this is a method they use commonly to get single-pointed concentration in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. Because it's said to be using the image of the Buddha, because it's the Buddha utilizing the enlightened beings, it's so much more power. It's like you just doing a short meditation using the Buddha is infinitely more purifying and meritorious for one's mind than years and years of watching your breath. That's something we have to think about. Yeah. So this single point of concentration Let's talk about it. Has anybody got a copy of Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand? Or can I get a copy from somebody? Somebody get it for me? Thanks. Let's talk about this single point of concentration meditation technique as the way they describe it in the lab room. It's quite interesting. Thank you, that's wonderful. Okay, thanks so much. No, it's not it. Oh, here we go, yes, back here. Alright, here we go. In this book they translate the term from the Tibetan not into calm abiding but into mental quiescence. So this is very nice teaching on this whole technique here in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand. Okay. So, okay. Anyway. So there's many ways of talking about this technique. It's described in terms of 9 stages, the development of this concentration. And I'll just go through those. It's really nice just to listen to each of the stages and roughly, even though it's a bit esoteric to us, it's good to leave the imprints in the mind, just to hear it once. But let's just talk about it in a fairly kind of casual way. What we're trying to do in this concentration technique is to accomplish this calm abiding, as they call it, this mental quiescence, which, like I'm saying, is not a state of mind that we posit as existing at all. Because necessarily it's a state of mind, as I've been saying, that is beyond conceptual and sensory. And of course in our culture we don't posit such a thing. And as I said, this is a Hindu technique. You know, Buddha came out of this tradition. So they say the 2 main obstacles to accomplishing this concentration, this focus, is the 2 tendencies of the mind to be completely, as they call it politely, excitement, well, let's call it berserk, the mind out of control, completely running like a maniac, you know, out of control, uncontrolled, which we in our culture think is totally normal. I mean, it's so shocking to think this. To think it's just normal to have an uncontrolled mind. Why do we think people who've got berserk minds end up doing what that poor boy did? And there we are looking to his computer to try and find about his mind. Excuse me, just looking for his behaviour. It's evident he had this berserk, out of control mind, you know. But because in our materialist world we're convinced it was put there because of some events, we keep looking for the events. Anybody with half a brain can see why he did what he did in terms of understanding the mind, you know. So we've got this berserk, uncontrolled mind, completely uncontrolled. So the one obstacle when you sit down and look at it is your mind berserk. You go all over the place, isn't it? They call it politely excitement. Do you understand? And really, to speak now, to look at the delusions in the mind, as we've been discussing, the delusions, the neuroses in the mind, the main problem here is the one called attachment. It's this constant, never stopping, wanting another thought, going here, going there, thinking this, going there, that, this, then that. All the time the mind is propelled to rush forward like a maniac, unceasing. Then the other obstacle, which is the other complete extreme, and they call it politely dullness, is the mind when it's, listen to the word, dull, you know. So if you think of that in our daily life, and this is how I'm talking now, it's not, they don't talk about it like this in the text, but if we think of these 2 extreme ways of being, either completely out of control, berserk thought, berserk mind, full action, wide awake and wound up, or totally spaced out and virtually, you know, almost like unconscious. So So the extreme for us is wide awake and wound up, or completely fast asleep and unconscious. Do you understand what I'm saying? So the extreme of the dullness, you can think, is when you're fast asleep. Your mind is thick as a post. You're totally ignorant. There's nothing happening. You're dead virtually. So in meditation, you can see your mind either spaces out, becomes dull and kind of vague, or it's chat, 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 chat. Do you understand? And these are the two extremes we go to. And if you think of your daily life, even in, this is again my way of saying it, emotionally, it's it's the bipolar mode. Everything's hunky-dory, perfect, divine, heavenly, wonderful, brilliant, fantastic, or completely profoundly depressed, you want to kill yourself. It's just my way of talking, okay? But the emotional thing is completely down and depressed. The mind is dull when you're depressed, isn't it? Or completely up when you're berserk and everything's all excited and perfect. And so we're just going berserk between these two modes of being, emotionally in our daily life, but speaking in a more subtle way in meditation, it's obvious. You're sitting there on your cushion, you're attempting to focus your mind, you're either chat, 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 or you're spacing out. Isn't it? Isn't it? These are the two extremes. The real extreme is when you go straight to sleep, or the other real extreme is you start following the latest thought, the new boyfriend, the anger you have, and an hour later you have no idea what you're doing because you've just gone mad. And that, you could say, is that boy. His mind went totally, completely, and for years utterly out of control, following every insane, paranoid thought he ever had, and look at the result. Speaking in a simple sense, you know. Absolutely no awareness, no control. And then because we believe every thought that's in our head, that's exactly what happens. This is what happens in ordinary daily life. This is why we do anything to harm each other. Because our minds are utterly out of control. So overexcitement or dull. These are the two main obstacles. So you could say what we're trying to achieve in single-pointed concentration is a state of focus that's sort of like this, it's like invisible to us. We're either dull or we're excited. You know, it's to be in a state where you're neither dull nor excited. Controlled, but in other words, my way of saying it is it's like, you know, you look at the mind when it's very on the excitement mode. You're wide awake and wound up. You can achieve lots of things in your daily life. You get things done. You're all over but you boom, boom, boom. The mind's super sharp. There's a sharpness about when your mind is excited. You understand what I'm saying? There's a clarity there, but it's uncontrolled. Now, so we want to retain that sharpness without the uncontrolled. And then you look at the dullness. There's something very peaceful about that, isn't there? Your mind's not disturbed. You're very peaceful. But you're dull. You're thick as a post. So it's almost like we want to retain the peacefulness and join it with the sharpness, without the dull and without the excitement. And that is where we don't ever have. It's an invisible place for us. Are you seeing what I'm saying, people? Mm-hmm. And that's why, to accomplish that, it's actually immense hard work. Immense hard work. Incredible will and discipline to do that. Because if we look at the excitement mode, which is attachment, everything in our being wants to go to those thoughts. Everything in our being, we're totally addicted to following all our thoughts. Addicted, completely addicted. And we are basically junkies to follow our thoughts. That's why it is virtually impossible for us to not follow our thoughts. So it needs enormous discipline to accomplish this. And that's why you've got to have lots and lots of practice first of morality, you know, and controlling and harnessing your energy. And of course, in Buddhist terms, doing all the practices, like your prostate, all the practices they talk about that help you purify your mind. You know, there's these seemingly religious ones, which one has to take on as one is ready. The water bowls, the purification, the Vajrasattva mantras, the prostrations, they purify your mind at a much deeper level that enable you to get some focus eventually and begin to get some realizations. Do you understand what I'm saying, people? So, okay, it's described in terms of 9 stages. So, like I said, let's go through these, even though most of it will be a bit abstract to us. It's just interesting to hear it. The first of these... Oh no, just before we do that, let's just see what they all say are the prerequisites that we need in place in order to actually get this concentration, which, like I said, might, if you're highly advanced, you might get it in 9 months. But many people go off and do this for 10, 20 years and don't achieve it. So it shows it's a long-term thing. But to even be ready to go to the mountains, which is the ideal scenario, speaking kind of colloquially, go to a place to be, the idea is already quite difficult for most of us. You'd have to have subdued your body, speech and mind to a pretty incredible degree, to the point where you could eat any food you like and there's no big drama. You have no social responsibilities. You're quite content with whatever clothes you have, whatever condition you have. You really have a very content, comfortable mind. In other words, if you could turn your back, if you walk out this door right now and kept walking without a second thought, and all your responsibilities are all dealt with and nobody's relying upon you and no mortgages and no dramas and no jobs, and then you'd be ready. That's quite advanced. Most of us will spend our life trying to get ready just to get to that point. You understand? We've always got these things that harness us to our lives, So pretty incredible to go off, be able to go off for 1, 2, like a friend of mine who's been meditating for 30 years, he's just gone off for another 10 years. He said, I'll see you in 10 years, I mean, it sounds weird to us. So way to go, long term. Long term. So, okay. So, okay. Then the other crucial piece would be, they all say that the ideal scenario for developing this concentration would be a place that's very, very peaceful, and that they often talk about, people who've done these meditations say the higher up in the mountains the better, because it seems literally the air is more rarefied, but the atmosphere and the energy is more rarefied too, less polluted, as they say. I don't mean physically polluted. This friend of mine, Renee, who's gone on for another 10 years, I remember him telling me, when I interviewed him about one of his many 18-month retreats, he's been doing retreats off and on for 30 years. This is one of his 18-month retreats, attempting to accomplish single point of concentration. And he was doing this at our centre Lama's Open Centre in Spain, near Granada, right up in the mountains. And I've been there, and it's like Tibet. His Holiness the Dalai Lama was there, and he blessed it, and he named it Ursel Ling, place of clear light. Lama Ursel, the Spanish reincarnation of Lama Yeshe, was born there and called after that place. So Renee said that up in this mountains, way up in the mountains, beautiful. His Holiness said it was just like Tibet, reminded him. Really like perfect environment for retreat. He said he did 18 months of this and he knew he couldn't get any further. He said he knew he couldn't get further there. And he told me that when he was in Kathmandu at Kopan Monastery, which is high up a bit because it's in Kathmandu, but it's above, and it's very busy. The valley, you can hear the voices, you can hear all the people singing their prayers, you can hear the dogs barking. But he said because, and this is a crucial point, they all say that one of the key factors about the place is that it's been blessed by the presence of previous meditators. In other words, more pure. And the meditators say you really can tell the difference. So he said, even though this was a more busy place, Kopan Monastery in Kathmandu Valley, his mind more easily became more subtle there than in the more rarefied, seemingly more rarefied, quiet place in the mountains in Spain. And that, he said, was really obvious to him, So that, they say, is one of the key factors, that it's a place that's been blessed by previous meditators. So literally, in other words, a place that's really kind of got the Buddhas around and much more subtle, more pure, more less polluted spiritually. Okay, so having all those conditions together, being ready to give up sex, drugs and rock and roll with no sense of responsibility, having a very calm body, speech and mind, content with whatever food you've got, not worried about your clothes, no worries, no dramas, mind really subdued. Now you can go to the mountains and start to get it. So the first stage, they call it fixing the mind. Fixing meaning focusing, fixing the mind. And here he's using the idea of the visualization as the object of meditation, not the breath. So I'll just read it for what it's worth, what he's saying. So here you focus on the visualization at this stage. It doesn't stay, and you can't make it persist for any length of time. But at this point, through the power of your mind's mental processes of conceptual and analytical thinking, you can detect that you are under the power of a lack of focus or of this excitement. So you feel that your conceptual thoughts have increased, but in fact, these thoughts have not increased. You have only had the insight of gaining some acquaintance with your conceptual thoughts. So this is a really good point. Most of us aren't trying to get single-pointed concentration, but we're all attempting to look into our minds, right? And don't we all notice that we often think we're getting worse? Well, you're not getting worse. This is the point. It's one of the signs of progress. You're not getting worse. You're just noticing your crazy, insane asylum in your own head. That's all. When you're living in blissful ignorance of your own mind and you think the entire problem is the outside world, it's quite a surprise when you start to look at yourself and you realise it's your junky mind that's the problem. So of course you think you're getting worse. So it's actually a good sign. Do you understand? And it's really important to remember that. The second one is called fixation with some continuity. After meditating in this way, you're able to evoke the image, and we're talking again about a visualization. It can even make it persist a while. So you can, maybe for like a couple of minutes, without being distracted. Now this is number 2 stage, and this is really advanced for most of us. We'll never even get anywhere near even the first stage. Do you understand? Just giving you some context here, okay? To actually have concentration for a minute. Because most of us, many people, like I said, can sit, but it's mostly dullness. It's spacing out. It feels very comfortable, very nice. But there's a real kind of a thickness about the mind, this sort of sinking. They talk about it, this dullness is like sinking. The mind sinks. When you're going to sleep, your mind is sinking, At this point, this is number 2 point, stage. At this point, your conceptual thoughts are sometimes peaceful and sometimes they develop. This gives you some insight into what it's like to be cured of conceptual thinking. This shows, number 2, an idea of what it's like to be free of conceptual thinking. Like for us, we live in conceptual thinking. The only time we're not is when we're asleep. And then most of the time you're dreaming, which is also conceptual thinking. So actually I've got conceptual chatter non-stop, 99% of the time. Both these 2 first mental states have a great deal of dullness and excitement going between the 2, And the image does not remain for long. At this point you are using the first of the 4. Okay, never mind that. So now the next one, they call it patchy fixation. This state is like a garment with many patches, and never mind that. The image persists, but the mind becomes distracted. You are immediately aware of this and you patch up the fixation. The duration of your distraction is shorter than in the previous 2 states. At this stage you are developing a more powerful memory. Memory, okay, this is the state that we often call mindfulness. And mindfulness, really the best way to say it, using the Tibetan term, and as Lama Yeshe would translate it, really best is translated as short-term memory. It's not some special holy state. We say it like a holy word. It's really just this capacity to not lose the plot of what you're doing from second to second. Do you understand? Mindfulness. Good fixation. You have developed by now powerful memory or mindfulness. And you can fix your mind on the meditation device, on the visualization. From now on, it is impossible for you to lose the meditation object, the visualization. So this state is far more forceful than the previous 3. Just the same, while you are not losing the meditation object, the visualization, you fall prey to the strongest forms of dullness and excitement, and you must apply antidotes to these. So then the 5th stage, becoming disciplined. So I remember Venerable Renee saying to me that maybe in that 18-month retreat, and that was one of many he'd done 15 years before that, he maybe just touched upon the 5th of these 9 stages. We just described the 4th, okay? So this is an interesting point. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, there's no question, he said, Robina, that the bliss, he might even use the word ecstasy, the bliss, the joy, the bliss that he experienced in his mind at that stage, 5th of the 9th, just on the verge of the 5th of the 9th, after 18 months, after 15 years of previous meditation, was infinitely superior to any pleasure he had ever experienced through his senses. So this is the interesting point that Buddha's making, which is hard for us to hear, is that the natural state of our mind, when it is free even temporarily of the neuroses, of the berserk conceptual thinking, is to be blissful. You see, we're so addicted to the sensory understanding, the understanding of happiness through the senses, that the only way we know we can access a pleasurable feeling is via contact with a sense object. This is what Buddha calls the suffering of the sensory. We're in this sensory world, we're in this desire realm. We live through our senses, and that's what we mean by happiness. Happiness is when you get a sensory, when you have contact with some sensory thing and you get pleasure. But the Buddha's saying this pleasure, this joy, is a natural state of mind when it's unencumbered by the neuroses. Just naturally the way it is. And he said that was no question, even at the 5th of the 9 stages. You know. So we're talking a quite advanced, subtle level of mind here. Are we communicating? Okay. So the 5th one's called good fixation. Oh no, it's not. 1, 2, 3, 4. The next one is called becoming disciplined. In the 4th state, the mind is overly knotted up inside. Now at the 5th, the greatest danger is from subtle dullness. Way, way more subtle than we'd ever get in our lives up until now. Here you develop powerful vigilance. Vigilance stands on guard, and you think this vigilance is a quality of single point of concentration, and it buoys up your mind. The difference between the 4th and the 5th is that only the former has coarse dullness and excitement. Becoming peaceful. In the 5th stage, the mind has been uplifted rather too much. In other words, you know, the subtle excitement. And under these circumstances, the greatest danger now is from subtle excitement. When subtle excitement arises, you develop a more powerful form of vigilance in order to detect it. You see that even this subtle excitement is a fault and that you need to prevent it. The difference between this state and the 5th is that subtle dullness is not the main danger here. Both the 5th and the 6th are achieved through the power of vigilance. At this point, the power of vigilance has been perfected. So this vigilance they call it also alertness. It's a state of mind that we all need to cultivate. And so certainly when you're trying to do your meditation, it's kind of like, I remember one time His Holiness the Dalai Lama called vigilance like a policeman. So there's your awareness attempting to focus on your breath. And even now you can think of vigilance like another part of your mind watching awareness. And of course awareness is berserk. I think it was like a 2-year-old kid, just berserk. So vigilance is there, and every time awareness wanders off the object, vigilance brings it back. You wander off the breath, vigilance brings it back. You can only conceptualize this because we don't give these states and we don't give these names to our mind. And that's why it's so important to study Buddhist psychology, because you've got a very specific view about the parts of the mind and how they all function. Right now we just have this great big kind of globby feeling of I. We can't name any bits at all, you know. So we're going all the time, this vigilance. They talk about how when you're even just at our level, attempting to focus the mind, it's going either to dullness or to excitement. There's either one or the other. You don't get any focus at all. You're either the mind's out of control, so the vigilance brings it back to the breath, and then your mind spaces out. Then you catch it again and you bring it back to the center. Then it gets berserk again and you bring it back. That's what the practice is, you know. And if you have to bring your mind back 50 times a minute, that's a good meditation. If you space out for that minute, that's not a good meditation. Because the criterion here of success is focus, is awareness. Spacing out and forgetting what you're doing is called ignorance. It might have a nice feeling, but it's not the point at all. This is why it needs immense will and determination and discipline. Enormous. That's just our gross level. So now, becoming very pacified, which is, in the seventh state, it's very difficult to develop dullness or excitement because the power of your vigilance and memory have been perfected. You develop the power of perseverance at this point, for you wish to abandon dullness and excitement as much as possible because you have looked into the damage that they cause. The difference between the sixth and the seventh states is this. In the sixth, you must be very wary of the danger of falling prey to subtle dullness and excitement. But this is not the case with the seventh. At this stage, there's no danger from subtle dullness or excitement. All the same, you must make an effort in the techniques to abandon both of them. In the fifth and sixth states, there was a concern about the harm excitement could do to you. Now at the seventh, you persevere and are able to put a stop to excitement or dullness whenever they occur. They cannot then interrupt you for long. The five mental states, starting with number 3 and going up to number 7, are single-pointed concentration for the most part, interrupted by excitement and dullness. At these stages, the mental process is that of interrupted fixation. And then the 8th is called becoming single-pointed. At the beginning, you apply the antidote of mindfulness or memory, and though this involves a slight effort, you are then able to pursue the whole length of the meditation session without the subtlest excitement or dullness. Here is an illustration. So then, okay. And this 7th and 8th stages are achieved through the power of perseverance, which is just determination to not give up. Finally, the 9th is called fixed absorption. The fixation is now effortless. You spontaneously achieve this effortlessness by repeated cultivation of familiarity with the 8th state. You need not exert the slightest effort to slip into single-pointed concentration, just as a person who is good at... Anyway, never mind that, it's not a good example for us. You're completely absorbed in single-pointed concentration. This state corresponds to the single-pointed mental quiescence of the desired realm. This 9th state is achieved through the power of complete familiarity. They say when you really achieve this state, you can concentrate for months on end, which clearly shows it's a state of mind that we don't posit as existing. I remember one of these conferences organised by Mind and Life, that you'll see their website, mindandlife.org, been going on for like 30 years now, meetings with the Dalai Lama and the best brains in the scientific world. And one of the topics, the topic of the conference in 2003, in Harvard I think, was the capacity of the human mind to concentrate. And there were the scientists, of course, using their assumptions that the mind is physical, based on the brain, conceptuality. I think 6 seconds or something, 2 seconds, I don't remember what they said, was their capacity. And there's the Buddhists, the Dalai Lama and his lot, basing their findings, of course, on the view of the mind not being physical and its capacity to go to these subtler levels. Their findings showed that you could concentrate for months on end. So, quite different views we can see. And this is what we're discussing here, which is the words might sound interesting, but we can't conceptualize, imagine this state of mind. Completely beyond the body. Super blissful. And this level of mind is clairvoyant, because it's no longer depending upon the body. It can see past and future. It can see events, it has cognition that this grosser mind of ours, functioning through the physical body, doesn't have the capacity to cognize. The mind is blissful. And then when you come out of your meditation, you're effortlessly in control of every thought. Which sounds insane to us. You haven't given up delusions yet, but you're so focused, so utterly in control. Seems quite remarkable. Okay, any questions, people? 8:15. Only early. Any questions about any of this? Or any questions in general about anything? Yeah.
When you're in single-pointed concentration, you have the object in front of you, such as the Buddha, and you're able to hold on to the object but you're trying to hold on to it and the object changes, maybe his eyes close, or you see him in a different robe and you're trying to hold on to it and it changes, is that considered your mind wandering off?
Well, I don't know what that's considered. It's not the point of it's sort of not, it's not meant to be what should happen, unless of course you're having a vision of the Buddha and he's talking to you and chatting away and closing his eyes and opening his eyes. Maybe that's a blessing, who knows. But it's, it's not meant to be like that.
It seems to me when it happens that it's kind of almost the same as wandering away, but my mind is trying to keep it there, but instead of losing it completely, something will change about it.
That's because it's your mind meant to be seeing it. Your mind is creating this thing. It's not as if it's got a power of its own. I don't know what to say there. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry. Somebody else? Anything? Anybody? Yeah. Behind you. Yeah.
I guess my question is in terms of even looking, or the concept of mindfulness, and for me, one thing, a strategy that I've been using to bring myself to that state, even when I'm just...
Which state?
To bring myself for focus and mindfulness, and just to be present with even engaging with individuals.
Sure, that's right.
I find that I have to rely on my senses. I'm at that stage
where... Of course we do if we're in daily life. Of course you do. It's impossible not to. We're talking at a much more subtle level, aren't we?
But even as even if I'm bringing into that spot where I am sitting, for instance, I feel the need to tap into those senses.
So give us an example. What do you mean?
For instance, I feel the tactile sensation of my feet on the ground.
Okay, this is a different kind of meditation, sweetheart. That's a different kind of meditation.
But is it possible to think of it that as a way for me to start to get to those subtle levels? Is it?
Yeah, of course. That's a technique of the Buddhas, isn't it? I've never done it myself, but that's a very typical technique that people use a lot. You begin to become familiar with the senses of the experiences of the body as a way to wake our mind up, because we're dead as a doornail right now. We're fast asleep. So it's a great technique, but you've got to move on from there eventually. It's a marvelous stepping stone. Of course it is. There's no doubt.
Okay.
Marvelous.
That's
Yes.
just where I am.
Absolutely fantastic, sweetheart. Perfect.
Thank you.
Someone else. Well, it's only 8:15. I could go home, or you can talk to me. Yeah, talk to me. Yes.
For those of us all of us who live in the ordinary sensory world, what would you suggest if one were to want to do? Are there such intensive programs, not to by any means cheapen or try to fast track learning Buddhism, because it's clearly it's life, in trying to focus and develop the mind and the path to becoming enlightened. Are there places in the world where one could go and maybe do sort of like intensive programs for a period of time, and then if they had to go back into regular life, and then they can go back in? Do you know what I'm saying?
I think so, yeah, of course. There are. There's various Buddhist centers I can know about who have either intensive retreats or courses that you can do. Yeah. There are.
Okay.
It's always good to do that. Or go off and do a retreat on one's own is really good to do. There's places that facilitate that.
Well, because the reality is, for most people, as you're saying, if you don't have a job, you don't have a place to live, you don't have a partner, etc., you could probably go and do these things. Well, what's the reality of someone going to do it for the next 30 years? It is possible.
Sorry, I'm losing you.
I guess I'm just wondering if there are these places where one could go for a period of time.
Like what?
A year or two, or I don't know.
Oh, of course,
there are
retreat centres.
Yeah?
Yes, there are retreat centres.
Okay.
Sure. Lama Zopa's got a retreat centre near Big Sur where people go for many years. He's got another place in Washington, other centres. Many different organisations have these types of places. Sure, they do.
Okay.
But my feeling is for most of us, having a daily life, to go off and even do a weekend retreat is so helpful. Just to sort of, because the way they talk about the mentality of the yogi, of the yogini and yogi, is to mind your. It's like You go in instead of going out. So obviously to be in a condition where you can not have to focus on the food and the place, and you're basically inside. You mind your own business, you don't talk, you don't look left, you don't look right, you go inside yourself. Even just for 2 days, this is fantastic. Because just most of us have so much just to keep life going, you know. We're constantly working on the external things. Just to even have 2 days where you can have the luxury of looking inside is incredible. In a focused way. Listen to the teachings or doing meditations is fantastic. Not to mention a week. Of course. Excellent. No doubt. I don't know what else to say about meditation, unless you ask me some questions. I'm so sorry. I'm sure there's millions more I should say. But I would say though, because we are creatures of habit, it is really excellent to have a structure, a structure to our day. And so a classic type of approach for a Tibetan Buddhist, you know, you have your altar. And an altar is just a surface where you'd have an image of the Buddha or your teacher. And then you'd have representations of the enlightened body, speech and mind. A statue with a picture of the Buddha or your guru. Speech is represented by a book, you know, the words. And the mind is represented by a stupa. So you have these 3 on your altar. And then, of course, being Tibetan Buddhist practice, having all these other purification practices, as they call them, which one can take on board as and when one is ready. You would then start your day by making offerings. You do, the water bowls, like these things here. One could learn that. And all these practices, we talked about this, I think, one of the days last week or the week before. You see, okay, the actual job of being a Buddhist is working on your mind. Changing your mind. That's the bottom line. That's the actual job you're trying to do. You're trying to rip out the delusions and develop the wisdom. You're trying to familiarize your mind with that which is true and that which is virtuous. That's the actual job. That's the actual job. But most of us, 90%, most of the time, we're not prepared to even do that. Like I said, our minds are too berserk. Our behaviour is too berserk. So we've got to do the one of morality of controlling our body and speech, controlling our behaviour. So in a spiritual Buddhist way, that could include doing all kinds of practices that are said to have enormous power because they're related to the Buddha, which would be these, what they call in Tibetan, preliminary practices, your nondro as they call it. So you do the water bowls, you do your prostrations, you do your mantras, you do these different practices that look like on the face of it, just plain like ritual religion, but they're the practices related to the Buddha because of the power of enlightened minds. These practices are said to be super potent in terms of purification and kind of virtuous for your mind, So that would be a classic way you would do your practice of morality in order to be prepared to get some concentration, to really do the job of working on your mind. So a typical Buddhist practice then, Tibetan Buddhist would be, like I'm saying, you'd start your day with, you get up in the morning, you'd have your little altar, you'd do 3 prostrations, you go do your water bowls, you offer to the Buddha, you bless them in a certain way, then you go to have a cup of tea or something, then you'd sit down and you'd do a practice. And a classic practice in Tibetan Buddhism would consist of several components. One could be some concentration, one would be visualization and mantra, and one could be analysis or studying or thinking about the teachings. These 3 components. So, your practice could be 10 minutes, it could be 20 minutes, depends on you. But to have something with those components, and the prayers in there, these recitation of refuge and bodhicitta and compassion, that can really move the mind, And that could be your morning practice. And then throughout the day, you'd watch your body and speech, try not to harm too many people, try and control your mind. At the end of the day, you'd finish with at least bare bones, like we've been talking throughout the weeks, the purification practice, the 4 opponent powers, where you go through, you kind of check your day, you do the regretting of the ridiculous things you've done, this life and other lives. You take refuge and have compassion for those you've harmed. You do this third step, which would be the classic one, would be the Vajrasattva mantra and the visualization. And the fourth step, you make decisions to change. This will be a perfect practice. And then you add, this is like your infrastructure, and then you'd add pieces to this as and when you develop in your practice. You might take this initiation, so you add that to your practice. But this basic infrastructure would be the basic infrastructure of a daily practice. And because we're creatures of habit, we're trying to develop new habits here. Just like in learning music, you've got to habituate your mind with music. You need to practice every day. It's sort of obvious, Yeah. So what's people? I have to ask you some questions or we can go home. I'm sorry. Yes.
Can I ask a question that's related to the other topic?
Sure.
Over the past. So this is related to the rebirth.
The which?
Rebirth.
Rebirth, okay.
Yeah. So the reason why we reborn is that our consciousness continues.
Yes.
And hence, knowing that, I was listening to His Holiness Dharma talk, and he started out by saying that Buddhism, we are so advanced in looking at our mind, how our mind works, the psychology. We really are advanced on that topic. On the other hand, science, modern science, are very good at looking at the nature of the material world.
That's right, exactly.
So he said that there's something that we can, as Buddhists, learn from the modern science.
Sure.
And so what that occurred to me was that the modern science, there is a concept of evolution.
Yes.
So the fact that we used to be an ape, we used to be an apes,
Uh-huh.
and then before, let's say, million years ago,
Uh-huh.
we were not even apes, we were animals.
Sure.
So there is sort of progression of our intelligence, getting more intelligent.
I understand.
So that in the past, when we are human beings in general, were apes or animals, we did not have intelligence enough so that we can practice this kind of analytical meditation.
I understand. So
Animals cannot practice it. Only human beings with intelligence can practice it, right? So what does that mean? Is that a meaning?
You mean, how do you reconcile these two views? Well, you see, what you just stated was the scientific explanation, wasn't it? Observing the different types of beings on this planet, we can track back from human, and it looks like this, indeed, as you said, this evolution. Well, the way to reconcile that with the view of karma is a bit like the physical is just like a bunch of houses. Think of the physical as like houses, and minds go into those houses at the time of conception. So, when did humans supposed to start on this earth? When do they say? I don't know history of this stuff very well. When do they say?
I mean, apes or they're 100,000 years ago.
Really? That's all? Humans already have 1,000 years ago?
I mean, apes are.
No, what do they say about
continuous.
human? When they start to call human?
Almost.
What do they say? The Western view? What do the scientists say?
50,000 years ago? I don't know.
I don't know. Whoever knows, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Okay, let's just say the Buddhist way of saying this would be this.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, we were apes. Well, Buddha wouldn't put it that way. We weren't apes. Mm-hmm. Human is a word referring to a kind of mind. Mm-hmm. A type of mind that has access to some virtue, which is the real distinguishing feature between us and, say, a dog or an ape. I mean, apes can be very nice to each other, but, you start threatening an ape, or it gets a bit excited, it'll jump on its mummy, it'll jump on its baby, if it feels like excited. You understand? They're a bit limited in their capacity. Dogs are as thick as posts, cats are as thick as posts. They're pretty brutal when they're threatened. Well, indeed, so are humans. But we maybe could say the one difference between even a halfway decent human is we can access some patience, and some intelligence, and some kindness. We can put two and two together, if we're lucky. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
So that's a characteristic of what they call a human mind. That is not an ape's mind. Mm-hmm. So at some point, the Buddhist way of putting it is this. Mm-hmm. There was an evolution of shapes, of houses on this planet. And at some point, what's called a human mind began climbing into those houses, and that's when we became human. Humans didn't come from apes. That's just a physical external thing. But minds, Buddha would say humans have been existing since beginningless time. It's a type of mind from other universes, other places, before even this planet began, because time, Buddha would say time is beginningless. Are you sort of seeing what I'm saying? So in other words, if you might be a human right now, your mind's in a human form right now, but let's say you're a naughty human and you go and kill and lie and steal and badmouth and do bad things, do you understand? You program your mind with negativity, then that mind will leave this house and it will go climb into a lizard house or a dog house or a rat house. So it's not as we have come from apes. On the external, yes, there's a shift. And look at lizards. They evolve over the centuries too. But the minds that live in a lizard body is a mind that's suitable to a lizard body. The mind doesn't evolve back and back. It's the bodies, and then minds go into those bodies if you've got the karma to go there. Are you seeing what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so what you're saying is our mind, the human mind,
is a type of mind that does not come from an ape. It's not possible. Minds haven't evolved. You see, we don't distinguish that in the Western world. We just think an ape is an ape, it's all physical. And the brain has evolved. But the mind is not the brain for the Buddha. It's a type of mind. The Buddha would say, actually, this is where it sounds really weird and wacky, but eons ago before this planet, a human mind was a much more subtle, more advanced one, with a very subtle light body, with immensely more intelligent, much more blissful, much more virtuous, and there was no gross delusions at all. And so at some point attachment and the delusions began to grow, which polluted the physical energy, which then gradually caused us at some point to start getting born on this planet looking like a bunch of apes. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, it's degenerate times right now, the Buddha would say. It's a very different explanation.
Okay. So before then we are somewhere else that we don't know.
Of course. Well, the Buddha would say you can know eventually. When you get Singapore in concentration, you get clairvoyance, you can see.
Okay.
That's the Buddhist explanation, anyway. What else, people? Yes. Go. Yes, sweetheart.
I think you called analytical meditation a special way of thinking, and I wondered if...
No, not even, I didn't call it that. I said it's not a special way of thinking. It's simply called to think. We think it's special. So, oh wow, far out, what's analytical meditation? It's just a clever word. It's an arcane medieval phrase for to think, the verb to think. Obviously in a very literal, logical, sophisticated way.
So could you tell us something about that logical, sophisticated way of doing an analytical meditation?
But it's not... If you're studying music, what would you think about? You'd have to have heard the teachings, wouldn't you? You'd have to have heard the musical teachings. So you'd have to be logical to think it through, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Wouldn't you? And if it was mathematics, you have to learn the mathematical logic and then you think that through, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you?
Yes.
Wouldn't you?
Yes.
So what are you learning here?
We're learning about wisdom. We're learning...
And what else are we learning in Buddhism? What does Buddha tell us? What's the Buddhist model? What does he describe? What are the views of Buddhism?
the two wings, wisdom and compassion,
and karma and impermanence.
Yep. Attachment and non-attachment.
Well, that's what you think about. It's not mysterious. You think about what you've learned. You think it through, what you've learned. Just like music.
So I had a dad who was very logical from a Western standpoint and taught me to be that way.
Yes.
And I have a husband who knows about Tibetan debate, and I don't know anything about Tibetan debate.
Don't worry about debate,
Okay.
darling. Don't make it too sophisticated when you learn those techniques. But have you heard the teachings about karma? It's this and therefore this and because of this. That's what you think about in your meditation, whatever you've learned in your class. And that's what logic means. You just don't, you see, we think in meditation sometimes, it's like this spaced out, random things come and go. We just think it's this weird, wacky world. But no, you have some concentration and then you focus on what you've just learned in your class. And whatever you've learned, if it's meant to be a coherent system, then that's where you apply your logic. Do you see what I'm saying? So as you get more sophisticated at learning this, as you learn more about emptiness, and you learn the different logical reasons about dependent arising and the one and many arguments, all the different arguments that are presented in the teachings, the more you've studied those, the more you employ that when you think about it. But if you haven't studied it, you can't think about it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not some mystical idea of logic. It's just based upon, like if you were doing mathematical, you'd be infinitely logical, wouldn't you, if you're doing maths or something? Well, the same here. But you've got to be rigorous in learning the definitions and the terminology and exactly the relationship between this and that, and what dependent arising is this, and therefore this, and therefore this, and therefore this. It's not mystical. You just got to squeeze your brain and learn it in the class. Then you employ that and you think it through with your concentration in your own bump, with your own cushion. Do you see what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying.
Good. What else? Yes. You see, the point I'm making here too is this is Buddhist meditation. If this were Christianity, you'd be discussing something different here. I'm using it in the Buddhist context. Of course, that's your choice, whether you want the Buddhist one or not. You might not, and that's okay. Yes, darling.
So going back to speaking of the time that we're in now, the degenerate time. So
According to the Buddhist view.
according to the Buddhist, right. So theoretically, these vehicles that we are in, human bodies, could go away, and therefore would that mean the minds that occupy these human bodies would just move on to a different form?
Well, no, darling, no, forget that. You don't need the human bodies to go away for your mind to go. You can die, like I said about him being naughty. His mind can go join a lizard house. Right now. You have to wait for the human planet. You see, we talk in the Western world about we humans, as if we're stuck in human. Like I came from grandma and grandpa and grandma and grandpa. Yeah. My body did, but my mind surely did not.
Right.
So our houses, we can track them back, but that's not the person. So you can be a lizard mind one life and in a human house the next life. So there's no we in that sense. It's just the houses we're talking about. It's just the physical world, the physical bodies that are changing and shifting. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, yes, I do. So then I guess I'm just wondering, well, what does it mean to be in a degenerate time? And
it means there's bucket loads of delusions. We're in the time of incredible delusion is going down fast. We're going downhill fast.
Okay.
That's what they say.
But we just don't go along for the ride. Clearly, we're sitting
here. Well, what choice
here.
do you have? You can get born in the pure realms if you want to, yeah. You can pray to get born and go and become pure. Then you go zap off with the Buddhas and get enlightened there. You can certainly do that. It's up to you.
Right.
But then you can come and join the garbage dump again to help us. You can do that.
Okay.
All right?
Sure. Sounds
good. So what else, folks? I'm sorry, I can't tell you any more. I'm lost. Any more questions? Come on, what about you, sweetheart? You ask me some questions. You, Amanda. Come on. Ask a question.
Well, this is very new to me, so
Yeah.
I'm pretty much taking a lot of things in.
Sure.
But I guess the biggest question I have is, kind of what's the point of even getting together if it's all an individual quest? Why am I listening to you? Why do you go to someone else for answers and go to and congregate if it's something that, we all need to mind our own business about? And
Okay. The Buddha says the bird needs two wings, wisdom and compassion. And the one we're talking about here today is the wisdom wing, which is the work we have to do on ourselves to rid ourselves of our own nonsense, to develop our own amazing potential so that we can then go to the compassion wing and help others. So we're just discussing the first, sort of like the nuts and bolts of how you become a doctor, and then you go and help others once you become a doctor. We're discussing that one here. We're discussing how to become, the Buddha would say every one of us has this extraordinary natural potential to be fully developed in bliss and love and compassion and wisdom and joy and contentment and utterly free of all suffering. That's a fundamental point the Buddha's making, which we've just sort of assumed in this class because, you're new to it, so you didn't hear all that. But this is one of the techniques that the technical techniques that we're describing here to do this job of becoming who we really are. The Buddha says we can all become these limitless, marvellous beings, but not just to sit out and bliss out, but so that you can then help others. That's the point. And also because we're all social beings. But you've got to do the job inside yourself. I mean, to learn music, you've got to do it yourself, don't you? You've got to play that piano yourself. You've got to sit at that piano for 8 hours a day, but you've got to have a teacher. You've got to have supporters. You've got to have friends you rely upon. It's an interdependent scenario, isn't it? But you've got to do the work. And that's the same point here. That's the point. You've got to have the discipline, the confidence to get there, mind your own business and sit on your cushion and do the work. then you're qualified to go help others. That's the point. Does that make sense? Okay. Time to go home. Come on, enough. A good place to end. All right. Thank you, everybody. So nearly hour and a half, hour and 40. We think every moment that we have been sitting here, every thought each one of us has had, is a seed we've planted in our mind. This is the meaning of karma. So may we nourish these seeds, these insights we've had maybe from this second forward, to continue to never give up developing our amazing potential for clarity and joy and contentment and love and compassion, so we really are qualified to help suffering sentient beings. We're all in the same boat. And if I don't do it, who will? Developing this courage of the bodhisattva. Kewa ji nyu ju dai lama sangye dru gyurne drowa chi kyang malupa te sala pasho jam chom sam cho rinpoche ma ke panam ke gyuchi ke panyam pa me payam gong ne gong du pasho. Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Oh, really?